Well, like a yearning, I ain't gonna cry no more. I went to the depot and I looked up on the...
In July of 1941, the inmates at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas City engaged in a work strike to protest the working conditions in the facility. For 1 week, the inmates refused to report to work. As a result, slowing down the profits of the prison industrial complex, which made thousands from free convict labor. The convicts chose 2 well-respected inmates to represent them. The white inmates chose Oliver Dressler, also known as the Preacher. He was a man who found God and the calling to preach after he narrowly avoided the electric chair. He was initially sentenced to 10 years in Oklahoma Penitentiary for robbery, but he escaped, stole a police car, and committed 3 kidnappings, a bank robbery, and murder while on the lam. The man chosen to represent the black inmates was Thomas Arthur Willis, 48 years old, had spent 23 years of his life in jails, prison, and penitentiaries. Well-versed in convict code, the last 13 years he had called Leavenworth his home, along with his younger brother James and confidant Archie Page. Willis stood out for his polite nature. Though he refused to follow prison rules, he disobeyed in the most respectful ways to earn him considerable respect and influence among the inmates and the ire of guards. How could this mild-mannered, soft-spoken, polite, courteous man survive in some of the most dangerous penal institutions in the country? His story starts in the cotton fields of Davis Bend, Mississippi, where his grandfather Daniel was enslaved, and his family were sharecroppers on the Willis plantation. By age 15, he would leave home, and by age 17, he had left the state, hopping aboard the Illinois Central Railroad during the first Great Migration. He left Crystal Springs, Mississippi, and got off the train in Memphis, where he rented a room across the tracks and worked as a cook at a greasy spoon to support himself. But he had a dark secret. In the evenings, he moonlighted as a cat burglar, carefully selecting targets, casing homes, entering through the window, or picking the lock. He lifted valuables and cash as he tiptoed around the house in his socks. And on the night of April 22nd, 1912, Thomas would again set out to work the night shift, leaving his shack around midnight on a quest for ill-gotten gains. 32 caliber pistol in his waist. Using a stocking cap for a mask, he scanned the back streets for an ideal target. He zeroed in on a home on a dimly lit street, and all the lights were out, indicating that the occupants were asleep. As customary, Willis took his shoes off to not make noise and briskly browsed around the home for valuables, as if he was shopping in a department store. Finally satisfied with his pickings, he began to make his exit through the first floor window when he was blinded by a policeman's flashlight. Freeze! Caught red-handed holding a pillowcase filled with stolen items, he was booked into the Shelby County Jail on a long list of charges, including robbery, housebreaking, possession of a firearm, and larceny. He lingered in the county jail for a month, and then decided to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for an 11-month sentence. Already locked up for 30 days, he only had 10 months left to do when he got bad news. A judge had reviewed his case and upgraded his charges to petty larceny, adding 3 years to his 11-month sentence. Due to the nature of his charges, he was remanded to the Tennessee State Penitentiary, a place so synonymous with misery and redemption that it was featured in the movie Green Mile. Walking through the doors of that wretched institution in 1912 as a 19-year-old man was nothing easy. There, he was forced to do back-breaking labor for 16 hours a day. He managed to do his time without incident and released just in time to be drafted for the Great War. He was honorably discharged in 1918 and settled in Baltimore, where he once again found work as a cook. All seemed well until he was indicted for 2 counts of larceny. Shortly after moving to Baltimore, Willis befriended a woman named Hattie Watts who lived on Stockton Street. Sometime around December 1918, 2 fur coats disappeared from the woman's home. And several months later, 2 of the woman's friends claimed they saw Thomas trying to pawn the coats at a store in town. A warrant was issued, and Willis went on the run and wouldn't be apprehended until June 28, 1920. Held on $750 bail, he would be sentenced to 1 year in Baltimore City Jail after a short trial. He was released on June 6, 1921. He boarded a train to Washington, D.C. to live with his brother, but he could not outrun his demons. Shortly after his arrival, he befriended a man named Howard French. French was a popular man in his neighborhood who had money and status. And most of all, French had a motorcycle. The country experienced a motorbike fad in the 1920s. Cities around the country, including Washington, D.C., featured motorcycle races where crowds numbered in the thousands. Several nights after Willis attended one of the motorcycle races in May of 1922, Howard French was awakened by the sound of an engine starting. With a bad feeling in his gut, he quickly ran to the window just in time enough to catch a glimpse of his pal pulling away on his brand new bike. French reported the incident, but it didn't end there. 4 days later, Willis broke into a house and took $200. Metropolitan Police began searching for Willis, but he had vanished. There was no trace of him, and no one had heard from him or seen him. A month later, in June of 1922, Thomas is riding carefree through the streets of Memphis when he hears sirens wailing behind him. He refuses to pull over and leads the police on a high-speed chase. After he surrenders, he is extradited to Washington, D.C., where he is charged with 2 counts of grand larceny. Because of his long criminal past, the judge saw no reason for leniency. Willis was sentenced to 5 years and sent to USP Atlanta. Paroled on June 16, 1926, he returns to D.C. and moves back in with his brother James and begins working a job as a truck driver and saves up enough money to buy a car. His old habits would catch up to him because addiction to fast money was hard to resist. On July 1st, 1927, around 8 p.m., Thomas, his brother James, and their friend Archie Page pulled up in front of a grocery store. Archie and James entered the store and put a gun in the manager's face. This is a holdup. The men emptied the register and made away with $300 of dollar bills and coins. The robbery was reported, but the police wouldn't get another lead until the afternoon of July 16. At 2:25 p.m., 2 men entered an A&P store on Ontario Place, Northwest. One man pulled a gun while the other went through the register. They quickly made their getaway, but this time witnesses were able to give police a description of the getaway car. Following leads, they soon located Thomas Willis, stopped him at 7th and M Street. They began to search his car and transport him to police headquarters for questioning. His car contained trapped compartments. Detectives located the stolen money. When presented with the evidence against him, he admitted to being the driver of the getaway car, but refused to name any of his companions. They then arrested Archie Page, finding the gun used in the robberies in a trunk in his room. The men pled guilty to robbery and received 30-year sentences. They were sent to Leavenworth. When Thomas arrived at the prison, he was described as the perfect gentleman, earning a work assignment in the kitchen and allowing him to steal items that he would resell. Eventually operating a prison store where he sold food, dessert, and prison clothing that he crafted himself. Earning a countless number of write-ups for fighting, stealing food, possessive knives, and marijuana cigarettes, he seemed to be able to get anything in prison, and this earned him respect and admiration, and punishment. Over a decade into his sentence, in July of 1941, when the convicts refused to report to work, they chose him as one of the representatives to negotiate their demands. Willis understood that this role came with consequences. Even though he came up for parole in 5 years, he accepted. Shortly after, prison officials squashed the strike by July 7th. and Willis and 10 other men were sent to Alcatraz as punishment for their involvement.